So now we're privileged to be joined by the next in the long line of leaders from Facebook's ad research team, Hannah Pavalo. Now, Facebook was a key partner to the ARF in our How Advertising Works project that Manuel and Horst referenced earlier on today, that we unveiled at Rethink this year. They do really, really cool work on all kinds of advertising optimization, including targeting, but also creative development. Hannah is part of the ads research team there, and she's going to talk about Facebook's work with a major snack manufacturer, how they collaborated on the copy testing effectively. Hannah, please welcome Hannah Pavalo. Thank you. Cheers.
Cool. So my name is Hannah. I work at Facebook, and I'm part of the ads research group. One of the things that we're trying to do is understand creative on our platform, and what that typically means is creative in the mobile world. So we're going to talk about an exercise that we did in the first half of this year with Frito-Lay to basically understand, would copy testing or pre-testing solutions that exist in the digital space hold up within the mobile feed environment? Oops, that's the wrong direction. So I think the first question sometimes is, why do we care about creative? And I think aside from the fact that creative makes a better experience for our users, so if you're seeing good ads, that's going to be a plus for our platform, we also know that creative actually matters a lot and that it drives impact. So we've seen this externally, so that first stat is from an Ipsos study from 2014. We actually shared the second study at ARF Audience Measurement back in June, where we were able to show that by looking at the creative content of video ads, we could explain 82% of the variation that we were seeing in ad recall scores when we were doing in-market measurement. We also know that this is actually just a huge problem within Facebook that's being talked about a lot. So we recently did a creative research audit within the company to understand how many different people were working on the problem of creative and at what scale. And we found over 16 different scaled studies across 4 different regions using 8 different methodologies. So everything from survey to in-market to neuro to a lot of other different methodologies. So this is actually something we're writing into a white paper now. But all of this is to say that creative matters a lot and is really important for driving impact. So then the question is, why are we actually focusing on copy testing? And just to be clear, so when we talk about copy testing, we're talking about the research of taking a creative ad, putting it in front of consumers, getting a response before it even goes into in-market. And the reason that we're interested in this is because it's something that our clients are doing. So if they're going to be investing and they're going to be putting all this money into creating assets for our platform or in general, we want to be able to help them to understand, how are you actually measuring and quantifying something that is an art, essentially. So what we did was we partnered with, so these are the 3 questions that we were trying to actually answer. So the first one is, could digital pre-testing solutions give insights into in-market performance? Would digital pre-testing solutions give us consistent results across them? And the third is, would these recommendations hold up in Facebook's mobile feed environment? I think a lot of times when we think about copy testing, it came from a world of TV, or it's mostly focused on TV. And given how different we see consumption is in feed, we want to make sure that the recommendations that were being made for video ads were going to actually work sort of in our environment. So what did we actually do? If you were around about like 15 or more years ago, the ARF actually wrote a paper on copy research validity project, I think was the name of it. And this is sort of borrowing directly from that. So this will be familiar, but at a smaller scale. So we partnered with Frito-Lay, and we worked with them to find 2 campaigns that were very similar in terms of their awareness and their goals and objectives. So these both ran in the second half of 2015. One was for Doritos and one was for Ruffles. They were both introducing a new flavor variant for each of their different lines. Other than that, the campaigns were fairly similar. So they used similar targeting strategies, similar reach, similar frequencies. This isn't exactly perfect, but this was the best that we could do to sort of match up these 2 different campaigns. The second thing was, they were both measured by Oracle Data Cloud. So we actually understood what the performance in market was. So one of those campaigns had above or outperformed norms in both lift in sales and household penetration, and the other one actually didn't make a significant shift in either of those metrics and underperformed on norms. So what we actually did is, from those 2 campaigns, we selected 2 videos that were representative of each of those campaigns, and then we worked with partners of Ipsos, Metrics Lab, and Millward Brown, and tested all 4 of those creatives for each of these solutions, which is their digital pre-testing solution. And so we went to them and we said, if we were going to advertise on Facebook, what solution would you recommend? These were the 3 that they came up with. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those differences. So you actually end up with 12 tests, 3 by 4. One thing that was kind of interesting about even this first process was when we went to go pick out what ads we were going to pre-test, the first problem we ran into is that Facebook campaigns in general have a lot of assets. And if you're going to test every single asset, it's going to get very cost prohibitive to begin with. So that was one of the first issues that we saw of maybe how copy testing and pre-testing solutions aren't necessarily going to work as well if you're trying to get a creative campaign read for Facebook. So this is just a little bit about the methodology. The interesting things, I think, so one was a testing environment. So this differed across the three of them. So Ipsos uses a clutter reel, so it's basically a media player where they were showing a bunch of videos. You see the ad, it's in desktop, not at all personalized, not at all Facebook-like. Metrics Lab was interesting in that they create a fake Facebook feed, and it goes on your phone, so you're actually getting that mobile experience. Millward Brown actually uses the respondent's own personalized content, so it's everything they would normally see, and they just inject the ad into it. So, but it's on desktop. So some combination of those two is probably most realistically what you're going to be if you're actually on Facebook. They also have very different ways that they're comparing things. So Ipsos is actually recruiting a control and then comparing it to that as well as vertical norms, while Metrics Lab and Millward Brown are just comparing to Facebook-specific copy testing norms that they've been building. The other interesting thing is about when you have these feed environments is that they can also give you some of this behavioral metrics that you would see similar to when you were actually in market. So video viewing metrics such as video length and completion rates. The thing that is going to stand out and that I think maybe had the most impact when we were sort of interpreting these results later was the context that we were testing within. And I think this is going to sound very familiar to some of the things you've heard earlier about context mattering, but the idea of the more relevant and the more personal it was did have an impact on the way people were perceiving that actual content. Okay, so now we're going to watch this ad in silence, which will be awkward, but that's fine. Because that's probably how you would watch it on Facebook anyways. Oh no, there's sound. Don't worry, you don't need sound.
No, I can't.
New Doritos Roulette. There's a hot chip in every handful. Eat another if you dare.
So that was weird, right? Okay, so this was one of the 4 ads that we tested. And the first piece of good news is across all 3 tests, they all agreed on this ad. So I will tell you that this was either the best ad or the worst ad. Who here thinks it was the best ad? All right, a couple people. Who here thinks it was the worst ad? Equal amount of people. Turns out it was actually the best ad, which is why I was allowed to show it to you. So, yeah, cheating a little bit there. These are just some of the scores. So I think in that first question of were we going to get consistent recommendations, the answer was yes. So we did, for the most part, see that everyone clearly identified this one ad of those 4 as being a winner. However, when we came to the other 3 ads, results were kind of mixed. The other 3 were all sort of average to below average, not consistently rank ordered across pre-testing solutions, but basically they were meh on all of them. So at least they were consistent, even though they weren't maybe telling us so much about those other ads. In terms of was it actually able to tell us about in-market results, the Doritos campaign was actually the campaign that outperformed by a lot. So we were seeing some relationship there, but again, that second Doritos ad was more ranked as average, and the other campaign was marked as average when we saw that it was actually a poorly performing campaign. All of that is to say that if you have an outstanding ad, it might be indicative of in-market success. If you have an average ad, all of a sudden the targeting and delivery and everything else matters a lot more on that overall campaign performance. Because in the end, it's creative plus in-market that's going to make the difference. And so when you have average creative, pre-testing isn't going to be able to tell you what that final result is going to look like because everything else matters that much more. So the last things that we're going to talk about, and there's I think 4 general ideas, are sort of things that we started to think about how we would contextualize pre-testing results in the future when we were thinking about Facebook. So the first one was that breakthrough really matters. And this is where that environment piece is going to come in that because there's so much going on in your feed, an ad on Facebook needs to break through that much more. So what this sort of means is that when we looked at those other 3 ads where they all had average breakthrough on the pre-testing tests, that doesn't mean that it's going to have average breakthrough in Facebook because the Facebook environment is that much more complicated. So I've used this example before, but being in Facebook feed is sort of like reading a newspaper, watching television, and stalking your friends' vacation photos all at the same time, right? So you're switching back and forth between text and video, you're looking at very personal content and impersonal content, and your brain is doing a lot to process things. And when you get into that environment, the ability to break through is really important for an ad just because there's so much going on. The other thing that I thought was sort of interesting about all three tests was that the breakthrough score was an aggregate score usually of a bunch of different metrics. Of all of the metrics, all three tests had branding as some component of breaking through. And I think the reason why that's particularly interesting is that when you get to Facebook, a lot of times people are nervous about putting up forward branding in their content because of the organic and sort of native environment. But I think that we know that in order to break through, you need to have your brand present in some way. And in an environment where it's even harder to break through, branding becomes even more important. So it's about making sure you're doing your branding right, not about not doing branding. When it comes to considering performance, again, the tests all found the great ads. That was good. We realized that the average creative is going to need amazing targeting and frequency in order to work. And we also saw that the objective should dictate the test. So the question that we often get is, we have all these different pre-testing solutions. How do we distinguish between them? How do we evaluate? And in the same way that we would say, depending on what the objective of your campaign is going to determine the measurement that you use in market. So if you're doing a branding campaign, you should be doing brand measurement. If you're trying to drive sales, you should be measuring sales. We found that the different tests, the three that we looked at in particular, Ipsos, Millward Brown, and Metrics Lab, all sort of had different focuses. So Millward Brown was really great about talking about equity and giving insight into how these ads were going to build that. And Ipsos was much more focused on trying to understand whether these ads were actually going to drive in-store sales. So the idea being that if you're going to evaluate your creative, you should know what the objective of that creative is, and then that can help to decide the tests, other than things like price. When it comes to designing campaigns, we actually did see that the pre-testing results actually had some pretty useful insights into how you might want to think about flighting your campaigns. So the first is about what works together. So we saw that because we're getting such a deep diagnostics on each individual ad, it's telling you what the strengths and weaknesses of each of those ads are. So in Facebook, where you're not just running a single piece of creative as your campaign, but multiple pieces of creative, understanding the different strengths is going to tell you maybe this combination of ads is overall going to do what my objective is, as opposed to this single ad needs to do everything. So if you have one ad that's going to drive affinity and another ad that's going to drive persuasion, that combination of ads is something to think about, as opposed to just like the individual ad and what that asset can do. The second thing was understanding who that creative is actually resonating with. So a lot of these different tests do things like testing within trialists or loyalists or brand users or non-brand users, and we did see very different results amongst this group. And in this particular case, where you're trying to introduce a new variant, you might be more interested in targeting either loyalists who are used to the brand or something like that. And this would allow you to actually do so. So on places that are digital or like Facebook, where you can actually target based off of consumption habit, you now have a very powerful tool for knowing which creative is going to resonate with each of those different audiences and can adjust in that way. When the question sort of came of how we would recommend these solutions and how we would think about them, they were really good at giving you deep diagnostics on an individual ad. So if you wanted to know for one particular video asset, what its strengths were, what its weaknesses were, how you would maybe optimize and change it, which I think comes from the world of investing a lot in sort of that TV creative, they were really, really good. Where it sort of fell apart was when we started to think about things at the campaign level, which for digital and mobile in particular is generally how you think about things. Because all of a sudden, for Doritos, we had one of these really well-performing ads and one of these average-performing ads, and us trying to square away like how we would think about that in terms of the overall campaign was really difficult. So one of the things that we would like to see if we were trying to push forward sort of our copy testing partners and providers is how they start to think about things at the campaign level and with all these creatives working together. So this is just a quote from our Frito-Lay partner. One of the things that was really interesting about this exercise in particular is that it was very clear about how you would use these insights in the future. So it gave very descriptive ideas of what you would do if you were evaluating copy or pre-testing solutions in the future and how you should sort of talk about those results. So just the last three, going back to those three questions that we set out to answer. So the first was, could digital pre-testing give us insights in market? The answer was kinda. So yes in the best case, and maybe not when the ad is average. And again, that's just going to come down to flighting and all the other millions of choices you need to make when you're putting together a campaign. Would the recommendations be consistent? So this was definitely a yes. So across 3 different pretesting solutions, and despite differences in sort of what their methodology were and what the contexts were, they did overall tend to say that this ad was really good and these ads were averages to below average. And the last one is, would the recommendations sort of hold up in the Facebook feed environment? And again, this is kind of. So there are some things we can do, like looking at that breakthrough score and understanding that that's going to be more important in the Facebook environment. And that's one way to sort of help these pretesting solutions get more into the Facebook world. But when it comes to things like trying to understand at campaign level, I think that's still where we're struggling a bit from that perspective. To find out more, we also just did a blog post on this at Facebook IQ, so you can see more information there. Thank you.
A few minutes for questions.
Yeah, so that was 5 minutes fast. So if anybody has questions, sure.
Did the Frito-Lay folks share with you whether there was any difference? I mean, obviously, some of those creatives were, there was a version of it for television. Was there a difference in the video and Facebook? Did you get any sort of directional information on it?
Yeah, so Frito-Lay, I think, differs by brand. So some of these ads had been made for TV and were tested in that environment. Some of them hadn't been at all tested. When we did this, we redid all the testing just to make sure that we were doing it on a level playing field. It was also just interesting to hear how they were thinking about digital pretesting, or if they were thinking about digital pretesting. So, yep.
Have you done any similar testing on Instagram, or is this at all?
This was specific to Facebook. We have started to look into using pretesting to get an idea about differences between Facebook and Instagram, but not specific to this. And this was also obviously a very narrow type of pretesting, so not getting into if we would see the same results if we did neuro or biometrics or any of the other solutions that are out there. Sure.
All these tests, some of them are in Facebook environment, but all of them are the completely exposed to the entire ad, the sound on.
Yeah, so both of the Metrics Lab and Millward Brown one, where they do it in a feed environment, it's a natural exposure and then a forced exposure. And I don't know exactly which questions are asked in between or what order.
I'm just asking because based on that, you guys thought about it all and how to better test for the true exposure of Facebook ads, given that most are, 2 hours now.
Yeah, so that is something that we're definitely thinking a lot about internally at Facebook. I think we don't really have a great sense of what amount of time you should look at something or how you should actually do it to get an accurate read on that. I think that's like a very interesting question that we're trying to figure out. Cool, thanks.
Thank you, Hannah. Cheers. Thank you.